Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the second part of this talk with um, Professor Ali, where we exchange um, views and listen to his insights into the post 7th of October world, especially in Germany and Berlin, where he's uh, very familiar with the workings of that country. But again, we didn't talk about the question of identity. When you talk about identity here, what is it that you're trying to say?
Well, it depends on which context. Identity can be very fluid. I always like to compare the word identity in Arabic, Hawiya, to the word Hawa, which means wind. The idea that it's very fluid, it's fragile, and it also depends on the audience you're confronting. I think identity tends to be something that we are renegotiating every day, and identity varies from the way you speak to your mom versus your professor versus the police officer. We actually have different identities when we're speaking. But in this context, identity was an idea of the reconstructing um, you know, the Arabs and Muslims of Germany, of how they fit in the world. And at least in Berlin, there was that space to experiment with, your identity, and to see how your identity and whatever work you do, whether an artist or an intellectual, you know, or a doctor, the idea of how you can flourish as an Arab in Berlin, in Germany. So uh, after after October 7, your identity has been put on this under the spotlight, and so it's not as simply as thinking about flourishing, but when do you exercise your identity because it's become a liability. Uh, there are places where if you don't have to think about it, life can go on. Um, you won't have to worry about what your identity does. But if you are not at the risk of arrest necessarily, but if you're seeing on the news that, Arabs are being arrested for their um, position on Palestine, or even being, you know, taken into custody and let go, even that is problematic enough. But you start to reconsider, uh, you know, am I safe with this identity? It doesn't mean you're going to change it, but it means that you're living at a intersection, at a critical node where Arabness can also mean danger.
Here is a dangerous question. Isn't it more relevant to talk the stances of the countries we are residing in rather than countries which are more or less are free to pursue whatever politics they're having? Like they're not having any borders with Israel. They have not had any conflicts. They it's a bit of a we're trying to torture or to extract information from the wrong guy. Aren't we? Are we brave enough to face such things, or talking about Germany and the West and vilifying some of its reactions is beside the point, because more or less historically the West is colonial. It has engaged in extermination of indigenous people in Australia, in America. Britain itself has so much blood on it on its hands. Arab, Muslim, Indian, Hindus, Christian, even. Um, but we're so you might feel more or less it's more of what has always been there in the West. Supporting settler colonialism was always part of Western identity.
Mhm.
Genocide was always part of how to
Mm.
grab new lands. And add to this the mythological importance of Israel for Christians in some American for Christian Zionists, as well as Israel being a very strategic, a very cheap outpost. And I would say it's more like the Crusaders who left some Accra, some small city or small kingdom, that Latin kingdom, which stood
Mm.
for over 200 years before the Mamluks took it down and destroyed it and kicked the Crusaders out. So, shouldn't we be looking more into our souls rather than it?
I 100% agree, Mahmoud. It's an excellent question. And I would say the answer to that question is the Arab Spring. That was the reason why it took place, because many Arab populations shifted their their perception of the world from outside to in. So instead of blaming the outsider, they started blaming those on the inside. Now, that uh, is quite a big task, and it's something that is not easy, I understand, for many of those who live in Arab countries to voice for obvious reasons. But I would also say that that the Western powers are also playing a part with their participation in this genocide, whether it's the arms exports to Israel, or if it's the vetoing anything that's not nice that's said against Israel in the United Nations. Uh, these are all interplaying into the region, so we cannot separate these powers from what's happening in the region. Uh, should we still be looking at ourselves? Absolutely, which should be the priority. Um, and uh, and unfortunately, that's not taking place, because the greater concern is also what the rules of the region are doing, that is facilitating what is happening in Gaza, whether they're doing that directly or more often indirectly. So uh, this is this goes beyond a question of shame. It's like, what do you if you don't answer to a genocide, then what other crime would you answer to? If you are talking about the crime of crimes, a genocide, if that is not being addressed actively with urgency, then what is left of the idea of sovereignty and responsibility to the region? Uh, and it's hard to hide things like this under the national interest, because the region is heavily interconnected. You're talking about Arab populations in every Arab country that's heavily pro-Palestinian. The, so every poll after poll shows that. Um, Yet the governments are taking a very, very different stance, and this is not sustainable. Um, and also, we should not take our sight off the actual problem, uh, and that is Israel, which has really shocked us. I mean, it's always been shocking us with its levels of sinister policies, and covering the whole corpus of ethnic cleansing and apartheid and genocide. But the fact that whatever they're doing is not sustainable, and
I
they're
understand this unsustainability, but it's still a very ambiguous thing. It might be sustainable for some 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, you guess. But I'm saying, isn't it a continuous war from the 1948 up to 1967 to 1982 in Lebanon to 2006 to 2009? Why is the Arabs' choice of peace, is it a good choice? Isn't it a failure to confront um, um, Israel. Hamas, which is a very small group, was able to sustain some
Mm.
good action, given the disparity in power. Aren't Arabs able to use war as well as a even as a negotiating card, like the way Iran did, like the Yemen? I mean, the Yemen is so far off, and why
Yeah.
this isn't an option? Why? And if it's an option, is it like a real option? What do you think?
The the reasons vary, but I would say that lately they're starting to see Israel as a threat. They haven't done so in decades. Like if you go back to 2016, 2017, they saw Iran as the biggest threat. Now the Gulf doesn't see Iran as the bigger threat compared to now seeing Israel as a bigger threat. If, in fact, if anything, the entire MENA region sees Israel as the biggest threat. And that's actually what's united Turkey and Iran and the Arab states um, to a large extent, at least in perspective wise of seeing Netanyahu's regime as the biggest threat to the region. Because it is not normal, not only just to be doing a genocide, but also to be, attacking Lebanon and occupying parts of southern Lebanon and attacking Syria and attacking parts of Syria and trying to stop it from, rebuilding itself, and then attacking Iran. And then, there are questions of, is Egypt next on the horizon? So the it's not a it's not a sustainable endeavor. You're not going to keep allies, let alone win allies, in this manner. Uh, and the other thing is that, unfortunately, and I know it's become like a trope, but the basis of it really hasn't changed in the sense that uh, Arab regimes tend to view U.S. dominated international relations through the relationship with Israel, given the power of the APEC, the pro-Israel lobby in Washington, D.C., and also how America has influenced policies that somehow always favor Israel over the other Arab states, whether it's sending them their best weapons or creating free trade economic zones that are favorable to Israel rather than to the Arab states. So uh, it, it's a justified worldview of why they uh, they would see things as kind of US dominated, with the hands of Israel or the pro-Israel lobby, um, you know, shaping things. It doesn't mean that it's right, but they the loss of imagination and the loss of ideology and the idea of just survival, because their priority is survival. Every Arab government is priority is survival. They're not going to be able to do any um, rock the boat per se. But if anyone's rocking the boat, it's Netanyahu, and he would have to he will eventually force the Arab government's hands that might have been reluctant in the past. Um, even today, the Jordanian foreign minister said, that there has to be an Arab coalition of armies to confront Israel. I mean, this is quite a big statement in this day and age, especially to
But
just
we're familiar with the
rhetoric.
statements from Jordan, which is full of macho, but we know that Jordan
Yeah.
cannot, or has. I mean, Jordan was basically complicit with the Zionists since 1948 in terms
Mm.
of like having their own um, part of a broken Palestine. They have taken advantage of to augment or have some territorial gains as Israel. I mean, there was, I've read Khalidi's book, 100 Years of War on
Mhm.
Palestine, and the book was really condemnatory of Jordan and its actions,
Mm.
which have delayed the establishment of a Palestinian state, which would have competed with Jordan, which wanted to have more territory affiliated or annexed from Palestine. The question is, I take you to other area where Edward Said was talking about the lack of institutions. If America, if Israel, if the West in some manner poses like an existential threat to the independence and well-being of the Arab world, the Muslim world, why don't we have institutions that study um, uh, America and the West in a way that allows us to steer clear from trouble, problems, and even prepare for self-defense? And I mean, that's the least any country can do.
I don't know if there's a lack of institutions or if if we mean of the lack of scholars. I think we have the scholars and the studies and the book publications and all that has been done. The question is a material question. Having the weapons and the organizational skills and the efficiency. And so, I mean, an example is the way Israel behaved towards Iran has now set off Turkey on a nuclear path. This is what's being discussed now in the mainstream, that this cannot, they now see themselves as being next in line, confronting Israel. So I think that the time of ideas and ideologies and that and what needs to be done, I think that's really all there on paper. But it's really the willingness to acquire the resources and to divert resources for self-defense, for altering the regional reality. And just remember that, if it was Camp David in 1978 and 1979, the signing of Camp David and removing Egypt from the war theater allowed Israel to pursue a war with Lebanon, literally even that same year, when the troops withdraw from Sinai in 1982. So the, the presence of actors in the region with with a loud voice and strong material willingness are able to alter the reality of what is happening. But the fact is that is not happening. Um, we're getting lots of condemnations, as you said, muscle flexing, etc. But whatever they're trying to do, it's not matching the reality of what's happening, and not just a genocide, but it's a live stream genocide. I mean, I think it's become so difficult for many to comprehend the scale of what is happening. Uh, Remember, in 1945, prior to 1945, you could not find a single picture of the genocide camps in Europe because the Nazis didn't allow it. It's only when the Allies came, they photographed what was happening inside, the atrocities and the bodies that were piled up. Prior to that, it was difficult to find images of that, of those horrors. But now you've got TikTok genocide happening every day, and it's not eliciting the same reaction had that war been taking place in a different context anywhere else in the world. It has been largely, uh, I won't say largely ignored, but whatever response is taking place, as we can see on the news daily, it isn't matching, or at least not able to uh, curb the hands of Israel.
But now let's move from this world of speculation and atrociousness of what is going on to what we can do as individuals. I, as a university professor, the only thing I think I'm able to do is post some of those atrocities in the hope that of raising consciousness or raising awareness. But this is futile too because everybody knows, everybody has seen a video, and that's enough. Um, so I find my hands quite tied in terms of what I can do. And even sometimes I think of myself like, what if my 2 year postings of those atrocities or turn to be something that the law incriminates in Egypt, or that I would be looked at as someone who has some leanings, or everybody's even some people are afraid to even like a video. let alone share it and comment on it. So it's a great moral dilemma of being unable to do anything, even the slightest or unimportant anything that
Mm.
might even uh, be thought of as a support is even becoming more and more difficult to do.
Yeah. I think everyone has a space of responsibility, from the head of state to the security guards outside a mall. Everyone sort of knows their space. Sometimes they can expand it, and that's good. And we should never be uh, judging, say, someone in Belgium versus someone, in Jordan. It's not the same uh, scope. It's not the same challenges that they face, because there is no doubt that rage and anger dominates what is happening, and it makes us feel helpless. Um, and what makes us feel helpless also more is that the intensity of it and the longevity of it, and it feels like it's just going on forever. And those who with power to do something are not doing something. And so I always feel that, the that what you can do, I think activism needs a broader term. It doesn't necessarily mean shouting in the street, which I think that's important in its own right, but even writing an op-eds in the paper, even instructing your students, the next generation, about how to keep your ethical compass in an era of genocide. These are all important roles. I think as professors and academics, we are really in a critical position, but uh, not in terms of um, the ability to stop things overnight. I wish we could do that, but importantly, also to educate and to, keep the moral compass, alive. Um, and for those who can, uh, who are coming of age, and many are coming of age. And if you remember what was my first political experience, or what was your first political experience, mine was the Gulf War. That's my first political memory, not experience. I wasn't involved, but as a child, I remember in Australia the Gulf War. My political coming of age was the murder of Muhammad al-Dura in 2000 in Gaza, uh, by the Israeli army. So the that sets us on a certain trajectory. But we should always keep hope as well that evil is not a sustainable enterprise. There is a time that will come of reckoning for all those who've committed what they've committed. And then I wouldn't say it's coming, it's already come. It's actually become very difficult for IDF soldiers to travel abroad, even to Europe. And there are foundations like the Hind Rajab Foundation and others that track them, because they were stupid enough to televise or to live stream the genocide on TikTok and Instagram. And so they're being, put in a database because what they did, they need to be accounted for. And there was a New York Times article that ran about how difficult Israelis are getting scared to say they're Israelis when they're abroad. And and they bring this upon themselves because 73% of Israelis say that Gaza should be cleared out. They're okay with ethnic cleansing. 73% of Jewish Israelis. Imagine, it's not a small number. This is not a problem of government, it's a problem of society. Um, but as someone like Iyad al-Baghdadi, the Palestinian public intellectual, based, that Netanyahu has become the agent of Israel's decline. Know, it's going to be some sort of poetic justice, but there's something ironic about Netanyahu trying to do the whole greater Israel, but most likely will actually, you know, destroy it the way he's going about it.
I
We
would
have a
like
question.
to add, yes.
Do you have a question from Saad?
Uh, y- yeah, she said she wanted to ask my you answered her first question. Uh,
I don't know. This is my. I don't know if it's. Sorry, if it's. This is,
It's on the screen. You can read it.
yeah, I can read it. Professor Ali, in your opinion, how can Arab intellectuals in Berlin ethically respond to the genocide in Gaza while under pressure from the German government? And how can the Arab community in Berlin express their solidarity with Gaza as well as without fearing surveillance and persecution from the government? Um, you know, I always think that if you've gone through worse in the Arab world, you could somehow deal with Germany. Like you know, so that it won't be the sort of torture and prison type of arrest. Uh, Often what people in Berlin and Germany in general fear is the loss of their job, which is not a small matter. I completely understand. Uh, but it's not the same on the same level that of say state security coming and you know especially if you're a German citizen, of course it makes it much easier. If you're an immigrant or sorry, if you're a non-German living on a tentative visa, that's a different story. It becomes more difficult. But I think it's so I had it's a question of horses for courses. Who's, you know, I feel people who are in privileged positions should really take advantage of their position. Say if they're tenured academics in Germany and they can speak for the pro-Palestinian cause, that would be great. I'm not saying everyone should, and I understand people have families and people, but and I don't to suggest that you know everyone who takes a risk is a hero. I you know because I've seen you know the blowback, but what one would hope is that if they can maximize uh, you know their capacity in whatever capacity that is, not necessarily just public intellectuals. You know, whether it's in their workplace to raise concern for the Palestinian cause, that would be welcome because I think it's at the end, I don't think it's the majority who are doing it. I'm not talking about Arab intellectuals, but I'm saying those who are in German spaces tend to often be quite scared. Understandably so, but hopefully that can change with the the the, the changing tide in German public opinion. Um, I, I just think that also with regards to the question of surveillance and persecution, is that Gaza is really the question of our times. It is the issue that that will be there in history as the watershed moment where we come of age and who how we were when this happened, and you know where we stood and how far we spoke, and what action we did take, if any. So it's one of those events where it cannot simply be ignored. It cannot be uh, you know sidelined because it's going to affect everything after the dust settles. And I really hate to say it that way because things should be, you know, addressed right now. But the long-term ramifications are going to be quite intense, not just for the Arab world, but also for the Western liberal order and international institutions and international law and the role of the UN and you know the role of sanctions, you name it, where academics stood. So I just think it's a question of on your deathbed, what would you have wanted to do in your lifetime? Um, and I'm sure this would be one of them. Positively sure this would be where you would want to have taken action. Sure, measure the consequences, be smart about it, of course, but also take some sort of proactive action that can leave a footprint in the world.
Speaking of which, there is a an intellectual in Germany. I quite forgot his name. He's a philosopher and he is into subjectivity theory or politics. Remember him? What's his name?
Sorry, say that again.
A philosopher who stood with Israel. And he was someone who was preaching this idea of intersubjectivity and international peace. I mean, there was this whole thing that once he stood for Israel and its right to respond and its moral right, the whole edifice of lies, I would say. This is an
Are you talking
academic.
are you talking about Habermas?
Yes, Habermas. Comment on Habermas's reaction to that, because I mean, he was someone who was cited very well, who was giving some solutions to international problems, and he was talking about intersubjectivity and between communities, and he was really in vogue. But now, what do you think? On his deathbed, what would he feel? What do you think he should feel?
I don't know if it's a question of what he should feel if he does feel anything, but Habermas is a very strange case, given that he's been like the guru of the public sphere and writing on it for decades, and the rights to the public sphere and the right to life. But for him to come out and say that never again should mean not only the protection of Jewish life, but also the protection of Israel, really shows the failure of the continental philosophers. It's similar to how you know Heidegger you know started flirting, I'd say more than flirting with the Nazis in the 1930s and
Yeah, it was the
40s.
Nazi Party. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, and that came as a surprise to those at the time as well. In hindsight, maybe not, but at the time it was quite unexpected for someone to have of his stature and his supposed moral views and writing a massive book like On Being and all the fascinating philosophical takes that came with it.
Well, can
But
it be thought of as the success of Jewish Zionist propaganda over a man like that? I mean, was he like?
I think I don't even think it's about. I think it's to do with Germany's complicated relationship to its history and the wrong turns it's taken. Remember, memory culture, which means that they have to remember the past and to remembering not to commit evil, but not just the protection of Jewish life, but also that Israel has become synonymous with that. Uh, it's not as old as you think. You might think it took place after 1945, but Germany, or at least West Germany, before the unification, had very up and down relationships with its past, and for a long time they were not even persecuting Nazis in the 50s and 60s. And when there was a survey that was done of West German youth in the 1970s, many of them said that we were born after 1945 and we shouldn't feel any sense of responsibility for the Holocaust. This is what was surveyed at the time. So, but this will not be a view shared today by German youth. There is a sense of we have to remember the past, and also the German government after the unification in 1991 took the steps of of solidifying its relationship with Israel as a way to show that Germany has matured and it's not anti-Jewish anymore, and that it can be trusted. Remember, this was a Germany that only by by 1989, with the fall of the Berlin Wall, where Margaret Thatcher, the UK Prime Minister, was begging Gorbachev not to let Germany reunite, fearing another war would happen. These are real fears at the time. The way we think of Germany today is not the way, or at least the way the Western leaders think of Germany today was more ambivalent back then in the 80s and 90s. Germany still was not fully trusted. They were not even invited to D-Day celebrations in 1994, and so which was held in Paris. So the we're talking about a phenomenon that ironically started with Merkel when she went to Israel and said, you're the reason of state, the reason for our existence. The Germans, you know, uh, future is tied to Israel, and so we're really addressing a modern phenomenon uh, that also needs to be tackled because it shouldn't be that difficult to say that never again should apply to everyone, and that you know the victims of Germany's past atrocities should include other victims as well in its long record uh, of 20th century, or at least the first half of the 20th century
I'm
atrocities.
curious about one thing because you raised it. No one talks. There isn't a memorial um, for Algeria, like that one. I mean, 1 million proven or 2 million proven um, did because of what the French, their massacres and their genocide of Algerians. There isn't anything like that in France, or even reparations like the Jews are taken in. Um, and the same for Aborigines in Australia. Maybe there are some. I'm not sure if Australia is trying to remember its past and think about it. And the same in America, where about in Canada, First Nations, and in America, the indigenous people. Was it only because the Jews were massacred in Europe? That was the question. Because all the other events that took place outside were not necessarily very difficult to accept for Europeans and Americans.
Uh, I think this question is answered in Hannah Arendt's Origins of Totalitarianism, where the subtext basically is that the 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 atrocities that were committed in Europe, what was surprising to Europe is what is that took place in Europe. Although Europeans have been committing these atrocities abroad, but they forgot one thing was that the generals have to come back home. You know, the soldiers, the British soldiers in India will have to return. The German soldiers in Southern Africa will return, and the colonels, and the generals and the sergeants, and they'll come back with these ideas. You know, and so what was surprising for European history, and from their perspective, was that the Holocaust happened in Europe, even though uh, Holocausts or smaller type Holocausts, but many were happening around the world up until then, committed by European powers. Um, and so, also, uh, what makes Nazi Germany in some respects an anomaly was that it was an amalgamation of these types of histories of colonial power and race theory and the romanticism of 19th century Germany, where they elevated the cult of the individual, or Nietzsche's Superman, or the bastardization of Nietzschean philosophy. Like it was really the coming together of different variables, or the Armenian genocide and the way that it was invoked as no one will care about the Jews. Of look what happened to the Armenians, as Hitler once said. And
Well,
so,
we have 1 minute to finish, so
sure,
I
yeah,
would like to wrap up this
yeah,
talk. Can
sure.
you wrap up it in a 20 seconds?
Yeah, well, no, I don't think 20 seconds can do justice. But look, I would say that, uh, the what is happening requires all our active presence and our active engagement, and to push the envelope in whatever work we do to be able to bring justice